By 1759, the Seven Years' War had truly reached a global scale, with decisive battles occurring across multiple continents. This year, later called the Annus Mirabilis, or Year of Miracles, for Britain, marked a turning point in the war's trajectory. Understanding these pivotal engagements helps reveal how military strategy, leadership, and geography shaped the ultimate outcome of the first global conflict. North America, the battle for Canada. In North America, the British aimed to decisively weaken French power by capturing key strategic locations. The Plains of Abraham, outside Quebec, became the site of one of the most consequential battles of the war. On September 13, 1759, approximately 4,000 British troops under Major General James Wolfe clashed with a force of French soldiers led by Lieutenant General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm. Despite being outnumbered and facing the challenge of scaling steep cliffs to reach the plateau, Wolfe's forces executed a daring and precise assault. The battle lasted less than an hour, but resulted in the deaths of both commanding generals. British victory at Quebec effectively opened the way for the conquest of Canada, severing French influence in North America east of the Mississippi River. This battle demonstrated the importance of strategic surprise, disciplined troops, and careful planning, setting the stage for Britain's dominance on the continent. Following Quebec, British forces continued their campaign, capturing other vital French strongholds such as Montreal in 1760, further consolidating their hold over New France. By the war's conclusion, French territories in North America were either ceded to Britain or transferred to Spain, fundamentally reshaping the map of the continent. The Caribbean: sugar, strategy, and siege. The Caribbean, home to France's most lucrative colonies, became another critical theater. Islands like Guadeloupe and Martinique produced immense wealth through sugar cultivation, making them strategically invaluable. British strategy, spearheaded by William Pitt, emphasized targeting these economic centers rather than focusing solely on Europe. In January 1759, British forces set their sights on Guadeloupe, facing harsh tropical conditions and diseases such as yellow fever and malaria. Despite heavy losses from disease and combat, British troops eventually captured the island, demonstrating their ability to sustain long overseas campaigns. Martinique, better fortified, fell only in 1762, but its capture further weakened France's economic and military position, signaling the growing effectiveness of Britain's naval and amphibious operations. The Caribbean campaigns highlight the war's global economic dimension. Control over these islands meant access to wealth and trade networks that could sustain prolonged military engagements. The conflict was no longer just about dynastic claims in Europe, it was a struggle for global economic dominance. Europe: Frederick the Great's gamble. While Britain focused on overseas conquests, the European continent remained the central battleground for dynastic rivalries. Frederick the Great of Prussia, facing numerically superior forces on multiple fronts, employed bold maneuvers to keep his enemies off balance. The Battle of Zorndorf in August 1758 pitted Frederick's 35,000 men against 40,000 Russians, led by Wilhelm von Fermor. The engagement was fiercely contested, resulting in enormous casualties on both sides, but no decisive victory. Frederick's resilience and tactical skill prevented a catastrophic collapse of Prussia's position. In 1759, Frederick faced one of his most challenging moments at the Battle of Kunersdorf, where a combined Austrian-Russian force of 60,000 men overwhelmed 50,000 Prussians. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the century, with tens of thousands killed or wounded. Frederick's survival and ability to regroup underscored his military genius, as he later inflicted crushing defeats on the Austrians and expelled the Swedes from Pomerania. These battles illustrate how leadership, morale, and strategic timing were just as crucial as numerical strength in determining outcomes. India: the Battle of Plassey and Colonial Ascendancy. Across the Indian Ocean, the struggle between the British and French East India Companies reached a critical juncture. The Battle of Plassey on June 23, 1757, saw Robert Clive leading a relatively small British force, alongside local allies, against a much larger army under the Bengal ruler Siraj-ud-Dowlah, with French support. Clive's victory had enormous consequences. It established British dominance over Bengal, one of India's wealthiest regions, and marked the beginning of the expansion of British influence across the subcontinent. French ambitions in India suffered a severe blow, reducing their ability to challenge Britain and effectively ending the East India Company's significant French rivalries in the region. The significance of Plassey cannot be overstated. It shifted the global balance of colonial power in Britain's favor and demonstrated how local alliances, intelligence, and strategic deception could outweigh sheer numbers in determining the outcome of battles. Naval supremacy. Controlling the seas. While armies clashed on land, the Royal Navy ensured British dominance at sea, preventing France from supplying or reinforcing its overseas colonies. Two crucial naval engagements highlight this supremacy. The Battle of Lagos, August 1759. A British squadron under Edward Boscawen defeated the French Mediterranean fleet, neutralizing the threat of French invasions of Britain and securing British control of key sea lanes. The Battle of Quiberon Bay, November 1759. Admiral Edward Hawke engaged the French Brest fleet in a decisive victory that permanently ended France's capacity to mount an amphibious invasion of Britain. Naval supremacy was a decisive factor in the 7 Years' War. It allowed Britain to transport troops globally, blockade French ports, and strike colonies across the Caribbean, North America, and India. Without control of the seas, British success on land and overseas would have been far more difficult to achieve. As the 7 Years' War progressed into its later years, the conflict widened even further. By 1762, new players entered the fray, bringing additional complexity to a war that had already stretched across Europe, North America, the Caribbean, and India. Spain, long a relative neutral despite its Bourbon connections with France, decided to intervene, while Portugal, a traditional ally of Britain, found itself directly threatened. These developments extended the global stakes and introduced new theaters of combat. Spain enters the war. Spain had remained largely on the sidelines for most of the conflict, despite being ruled by the Bourbon monarchy that also governed France. King Charles III ascended to the Spanish throne in 1759, inheriting a kingdom that had watched the war from a distance while France suffered significant losses in North America and the Caribbean. Charles III grew concerned that British victories in the Americas would eventually threaten Spain's own colonies. The British control of strategic locations such as Cuba and Florida posed a direct threat to Spanish trade and territorial interests in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. By 1762, Spain adopted a pro-French stance, joining the war against Britain in hopes of preserving its empire and recovering lost honor. The British preemptive strategy. Britain, anticipating Spanish involvement, prepared its military to counterattacks in the Americas and Europe. Under the direction of Admiral George Pocock, a British expeditionary force sailed in March 1762 to the Caribbean. They gathered additional ships and troops in the West Indies before targeting the Spanish stronghold of Havana. The Siege of Havana became a massive operation. Approximately 30,000 British soldiers and sailors besieged the city over a period of 10 weeks. Despite facing a well-fortified city, disease, and difficult tropical conditions, the British successfully captured Havana in mid-August 1762. This victory not only disrupted Spanish colonial administration, but also demonstrated Britain's growing capacity for complex amphibious campaigns. The Philippines, far-reaching British ambitions. At the same time, another British expedition, commanded by Vice Admiral Sir Samuel Cornish, targeted Spanish holdings on the other side of the world. The British landed in the Philippines, where they quickly laid siege to Manila. Facing overwhelming odds, the Spanish Governor-General, Archbishop Manuel Rojo, surrendered the city in early October 1762. This operation exemplifies the global reach of the conflict.
Britain's ability to project military power across oceans, simultaneously striking the Caribbean and Asia, was unprecedented. It highlighted the importance of naval supremacy and logistical coordination in achieving victory during the war.
Portugal under siege. Meanwhile, on the European continent, Spain and France sought to strike against Portugal, a long-standing ally of Britain. A combined Franco-Spanish force invaded Portugal in spring 1762, aiming to seize key territories and weaken Britain's position in Europe. Despite an immense numerical advantage, the invaders encountered strong resistance from Anglo-Portuguese forces, coordinated by the British government. Over several months, the Allies repelled the Franco-Spanish army on multiple occasions. By early November 1762, the combined forces of Britain and Portugal had successfully defended their territory, marking a significant failure for Spain and France in Europe. Portugal's resilience demonstrated the importance of alliances, local knowledge, and coordinated defense strategies in countering larger invading forces. Impact on the European theater. Spain's entry into the war added pressure on all sides. Prussia, already stretched thin fighting Austria, Russia, and Sweden, now faced a potential diversion of French and Spanish forces from other fronts. Frederick the Great, however, remained resilient. He successfully regrouped his forces and, with new alliances forming, managed to stabilize Prussia's position in Europe. Meanwhile, Britain's diplomatic efforts ensured continued support from Portugal and reinforced their colonial campaigns. The simultaneous offensives across multiple continents placed immense strain on the Bourbon alliance. The British capacity to fight both in Europe and overseas while coordinating with allies proved decisive in tipping the balance of the war. Turning the tide. By the end of 1762, the entry of Spain into the war had paradoxically helped Britain solidify its position. While initially threatening, the poorly executed Spanish campaigns, coupled with Britain's preemptive global strikes, shifted momentum decisively in Britain's favor. In Europe, Frederick the Great managed to recover lost territory with the temporary assistance of Russia's new leadership, while British forces continued to control key colonies worldwide. The combined effects of these campaigns foreshadowed the war's conclusion. Spain, despite its ambitions, had failed to alter the strategic balance. Portugal remained secure, British colonial power was expanding, and Prussia was regaining strength in Central Europe. The stage was now set for the peace negotiations that would formally end the 7 Years' War and redraw the map of the world.